This video is the first in the series of videos that make up the History of Pandemics series. Happy viewing! That the novel coronavirus has reached every nation on the planet is no news. That it is claiming lives is also no news. This is not the first time that a pandemic of this magnitude is hitting the world. In 541 CE, while the supreme power of the empire was all that mattered, Emperor Justinian, ruler of the Byzantine Empire, had just conquered Egypt, and as was the practice, he was entitled to tributes from his conquered lands. So, along with the tributes that came to Constantinople from Egypt, were black rats infested with fleas. These fleas were carriers of a deadly bacterium called Yersinia pestis. This bacterium resulted in the fatal infection otherwise known as the plague. The Justinian Plague of 541 CE from across the Mediterranean Sea, decimated Constantinople. It didn't stop there. Like wildfire, it spread across Europe, Asia, North Africa, and Arabia, leaving death in its wake. The Justinian Plague of 541 CE killed an estimated 30 to 50 million people. By 541 CE, this was perhaps half of the world's population. Because medicine was not as advanced as it is today. The people of that time had no clue how to battle the plague, they did not understand the plague. So, according to records, those who were found to have been infected were avoided. In most cases, they were isolated from the general population. They were usually confined to their living quarters. It is believed that the plague ended because, over time, those that survived the pandemic had developed some kind of immunity against the plague. The bacteria responsible for the Justinian plague was never really eradicated, because 800 years later, it resurfaced. This time, it caused a pandemic that was called Black Death. It is estimated that between 1347 and 1351, Black Death claimed an astonishing 200 million lives in Europe. But by this time, they had come to have an understanding based on the experience of the method by which the disease was spread. Though, they still had no real scientific understanding of contagion. They however knew that it had something to do with proximity. That was why immigration officials were placed in the coastal port city of Raguse. They were tasked to ensure that all newly arrived sailors were kept in isolation until they could prove they weren't sick. When the practice of Trentino was first initiated, sailors were barred from disembarking from their ships for 30 days. However, as time went on, the forced isolation was increased to 40 days, a practice that was referred to as quarantino. When the Western world adopted this practice of forced isolation, they called it quarantine. According to historical records, for about 300 years after the Black Death pandemic, the plague always resurfaced in London at roughly every 20 years interval. Because there was still very little known of contagion at the time, with every recurring pandemic, an estimated 20% of London's men, women, and children were killed. In the next video in the History of Pandemics series, we shall see man's efforts to overcome the pandemic despite their limitations at the time.